Hello, everyone. I'm Raj Changadoo. This is Property Investing 2.0, and my guest today is Dan Eaton. Dan is a skilled property investor, developer, and public speaker. His strategies primarily involve service accommodation and commercial conversions, and we're looking forward to diving into a little bit of both of those today. Dan, hello and welcome. How are you?
Good morning, Raj. Yeah, great to be here. Thank you very much for having me. I'm really well, thank you. I'm really, really good.
Good. No, it's a pleasure to have you here with us today. As I said, I'm looking forward to diving into your strategies a little bit more, your property journey, your approach, and hopefully provide a few tips for those people looking to get to the next level of their property journey. But I wanna start in a slightly more random place. And we were talking before about the need to constantly be resourceful within this game, especially within property development. And you gave me a great example of that before. You were talking about a couple of water wells that you found on sites last year.
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right, Raj. I mean, property development generally for me is just literally about solving problems. Okay, and most of it's about solving problems and seeing the opportunities and solving the problems. And you're quite right. What we had last year, completely randomly, is on two separate sites. We had now these were commercial conversion sites with a slight extension, and we had on two separate sites within the space of about 6 months of each other. Now that's the only projects we did last year where we had to actually dig foundations. On both sites in different towns within 6 months of each other, we found wells right where the footings needed to be. So I mean, when the first one happened, and it was just a little bit of okay, we've got a well, that's a problem, right? How are we going to solve this? And I think actually there's an important segue here as well about making sure that your team around you are really, really resourceful as well, because a lot of the times in property development it is about having the right team around you. So we got together with the teams like, okay, what do we do about this? Suggestions from the team. Okay, get the good structural engineer out. The structural engineer comes out, has a look at it, we measured it, we worked out what was going to be on, and then came up with a plan that we could then implement. And then building control were happy, warranty provider was happy, structural engineer was happy, therefore that's good, we can now carry on with it. And when the second one happened, and when I got the phone call saying, Dan, you're not going to believe this, we've found another well, I thought the team were sort of winding me up. I thought they were trying to just have a bit of a joke, because the first one was not stressful, but obviously it is a problem to be solved. And I honestly thought they were winding me up when they said we found a well. I was like, no, we've done that already. We fixed that. What do you mean we found another one? And it turned out that the second project had also had a well where the footings for the foundations needed to be. So at that point, though, we'd already had the process. So it was, get the structural engineer out. Let's have a look what we're going to be doing. Get the building control sign off. Get the warranty providers happy. Get it all done. Filled, capped, and reinforced, and we just carried on with it. So we became a bit of an expert in filling and wells for foundations. So yeah, it was quite an interesting time.
That's amazing. I mean, I've done a few new builds and commercial conversions, and I've had the sewer diverts, those ones. And when you come across your first one, you're like, oh great. Like you said, having that team around you is so important. And then once done the first one, it was easier for the second one. But I'd never come across a well, so I thought, oh, actually, it'd be interesting to know how you deal with that. So you've got to fill it and reinforce it. Is that what you got to do?
Yeah, so they were slightly different in terms of their depths and the soil conditions, etc. But ultimately, what happened is, yeah, it was filled up with some sort of aggregate, and then it was a reinforced cap that was put onto it. So we basically had to, I think, build foundations around it, and then cap it with the reinforcements across through the foundation, so the footings could carry on. So in that section, the footings are quite wide because they've got a well underneath them. But yeah, it was just about diverting the structural loads so it didn't end up going into the well. So yeah, try to get the soil conditions around it. But yeah.
Yeah, well, like you said, hopefully it's not too often that people are going to come across that. But if they do, they now have a good idea how to deal with it potentially. So speak to your structural engineer early days, have that team around you, and I guess the ever important have that contingency fund available because you never know what's going to crop up, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's one of the differences I find particularly between the conversions and the new builds is that the amount of contingencies that you need. And generally, you'll need contingencies in these projects anyway, but you use them in some ways in different areas. So for the new build side, tend to find that the contingencies are in the ground, because that's the only bit that's unknown. Everything else is, you can cost it down to the number of screws if you want to. Whereas on the conversion side, the contingencies tend to be in, you're not quite necessarily sure what's behind those stud walls until you actually take them down. And I had I'm aware of a project basically where an old office that was back when I was in the corporate world, and they took some walls down and found a massive concrete pile that was reinforcing all the staircases, which wasn't on any drawings or anything. So that caused some problems in terms of time and redesigning the building based on the fact that there was this massive concrete pillar that shouldn't have been there. So yeah, you tend to use the contingencies in a different way, but yeah, absolutely, having the contingencies in, having the team around you to have a look, assess the problem, come up with solutions for you, and then ultimately as a developer, my job is to make the decision based on their expert advice. So yeah.
No, absolutely. So let's rewind a little bit. Let's take it back and tell us how you first got started in property and what you're up to before that.
Yeah, sure. So I'll go back a little bit. My working life, if you like, my first career was I was in the Royal Navy. So I pretty much sort of left home at 18, went and joined the Navy, went to see the world, all the rest of it. Met my wife, Vicky, and when we had our children, that was the time for me to leave the Navy because it was no longer the same for me. It was no longer a case of okay, I'll see you in 6 months, or I'll see you in a far-flung exotic place in a couple of months when she'd fly out and see us. But that changed when my children came along. So I then basically left the Navy and I wasn't really sure what to do. So I sort of fell into the thing that most people who were leaving my job did, which was I went into the corporate world. And I ended up being a project manager for an engineering firm, although, you know, people talk about engineering firms. Oh, you're an engineering firm, you moved into property. You must have already had the skill sets. But no, I worked in the IT department, so I worked in their IT arm of the engineering firm. So I was a project manager, program consultant, those types of roles. And in that, I did a lot of work around contracts, relationships, behaviors, teams, all those sorts of things. Now those skills are really, really useful when you move into property, absolutely. But it was 2017, and a friend of mine basically said, Dan, you've always been interested in property. And I was like, yeah, I've watched Homes Under the Hammer. It was a friend from the Navy. So we'd generally been sat in the mess deck at what we called Stand Easy, which was your 10 o'clock coffee break, watching Homes Under the Hammer, whilst waiting to then go back and do whatever the work was. And he knew I was interested in property because I'd watched Homes Under the Hammer. Never done anything with it because whenever I earned any money, we spent it. So I didn't have money for a deposit. And he said, why don't you come along to this property event? So sure enough, I did. Went along to a 3-day property seminar and literally sat there with my eyes being open to this entire waterfront, this entire new world of property investing that I just had no idea that existed. And once I sort of processed what was going on, I realized something very, very, in some ways, simplistic, which is that property investing is just about a couple of different parties, people, companies, whatever, coming to some sort of agreement for everyone's benefit, which is exactly what I'd been doing in the corporate world with big companies and procurements and contracts and everything else. It was, one party had something, the other party wanted to contract for it in some way. They had a conversation about it, came up with some, terms. They signed a contract, and then that thing happened. And it just occurred to me that's exactly what property is. Now, no matter what strategy you're doing, it's the same sort of thing. It's just two parties having a conversation and agreeing to do something. And then there's some paperwork and generally solicitors involved in the middle of it. And then it happens. And that's where I realized that there was nothing really special about investing in property. It was just that I didn't know how to do it. So I then went and purchased a load of educational courses, learned a lot about doing the property strategies, and then just went and implemented them.
Well, I mean, that is just action after action that you're taking there. A lot of people can take a lot longer to get to that stage. You read a book one year and you think, that was really exciting, that was really good, I enjoyed that. And then you think maybe next year something comes up and you get into property again, you go, oh yeah, I might go to this seminar, I might go to this networking event. The fact that you hit the ground running so quickly and was so consumed in it straight away, what was the why, what was the driver behind that?
Yeah, great question. So I think what I'd learned probably from going to the Navy into the corporate world, and particularly in the corporate world, was that I was a lot more entrepreneurial than the construct the constriction or the constraints of that corporate world would let me be. So when I started thinking about what property could do and the sort of lifestyle that it could give us and the way that we could work, it all just sort of started to and click into place. Now, at the time, my wife had just left NHS employment, so she was in the NHS at this point. And I'll tell the story. I don't know if you've ever heard me tell this story or not, because you sat next to me, so this could be quite interesting. If you hear a thud, it's me just being punched. But there was a moment when one morning Vicky was basically in the bathroom crying about going to work, because all of the stress and strain and everything that she was trying to do in the NHS just was on top of it. It was just overwhelm, pure overwhelm. So I said to her at that point, I said, look, there's something not right. Just quit. We'll figure something out. Just quit. And thankfully she did. So she went into work that day, put a notice in, and I think by lunchtime it had been accepted. So I got the phone call at work saying, I've done it, it's been accepted, and off we go. I was like, yes. And then I was like, oh no, now what do we do? So we had we'd had that shift from having two incomes to only having one income. Now, at the time, my income was fluctuating because I was doing a lot of contract work. So I took a permanent position, which basically meant we'd effectively halved our income just through that period. So when this kind of property side of things came along, and I could understand that it was just a process that we just needed to follow, and actually it could get us to wherever we wanted to be, because ultimately the firm believer now that you can sort of design your own lifestyle. You just need to know how, and that was part of the reason. So the part of the reason was I want to spend more time with the kids. My wife had given up that stable income. We'd halved our income. The holidays, the cars, it's another story. We had a boat at that time as well. That's another story. All that had to go and disappear. So I'm not saying by any means that we were in dire straits, but compared to where we were compared to what we'd found ourselves in, it was a massive lifestyle adjustment. So that played into it, absolutely.
I think there's two things I've picked up from that, and one is when you give yourself less choices, less outs, your back's up against the wall. You kind of, not saying completely up against the wall, but no, you have to find a way to replace this income. You have to find a way to press forward, and I think that kind of helps, because when your back's up against the wall, there's only one way to go forward, right? The other thing that I noticed is, like you said, it seems like your past careers in the military, in corporate life, the level of responsibility, the level of discipline and other skills that you picked up definitely probably help lay the foundations, right? You've learned some skills and experience in the past that are absolutely transferable.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And we see in the property world generally, and I mentor and help a lot of people, and the people who are successful in it, you touched on it yourself actually. They're the ones who just take the action. Now, when we look back at the military, what tended to happen in the military is if I went on a course in the military, I would sit in a classroom, someone at the front would tell me what I needed to do, and then we would go and do it. Okay, and that I think has just stuck with me through life. So if I'm going to go and sit on a course and someone's going to teach me how to do something, they're going to teach me the process, the way to do it, and how to do it, then I'm just going to go and do it the way that they've taught me. I didn't leave any of those military training environments and think, okay, this is how they've told me to do it. What I'll do now is I'll think about it. Maybe I'll just go and do some Googling for a couple of months. I'll then try and think of a different way to do it. And also I then spoke to my mate down the pub or a family friend, and they said I should do it differently. That never even occurred to me. And it's the same with the property side of it. I went on a course, they told me how to do it. I went and then just did it as they told me. And funny old thing, it worked. It's just a process, right? There's no secret to it. It's just a process. So having that discipline from that background, absolutely. But the other thing you get in the military, particularly, and you mentioned it earlier, is the resourcefulness. So you just generally have a can-do attitude. So things go wrong, absolutely, and you just have to try and solve those problems. And it isn't a case of, I mean, let's face it, I was in the Navy, and if you're on a ship and something goes wrong, you're in the middle of the ocean, or did some submarine trips as well. If you're on a submarine and something goes wrong, it's not like you can just give up and just go, do you know what? That didn't work, I'll walk away. You have to come up with some sort of solution, and most times there is a solution. So yeah, just playing those things in really, really helps.
No, it's great to hear a different perspective, people's journeys, different approaches, but people come back to that side of things, that being resourceful, that the mindset approach. And I was going to talk about mindset a little bit later, but we're right in it at the moment, so I'm going to carry on. And you said there's just steps, and people just need to follow those steps if they want to get into it and they want to do these things. But some people just, like you said, either hit the wall or never get started in the first place. So, your thoughts? What do you think separates those who can and don't from those who can and do? Really?
So I've got a great story about this because my best mate, he'll listen to this and kill me as well later. So it's going to be good this for
You're
my
putting a lot of people in it
longevity.
today, aren't
I
you?
am,
Really?
because they're really good examples. And exactly that. And to be fair, my best mate knows I'm going to tell this story because I've asked him about it before. But my best mate and myself, we grew up in Huddersfield. He joined the Navy as well, followed around, and randomly we sort of ended up living, down the south of England, about 8 miles apart, just the way that the circumstances happened, all the rest of it. So he was going to come with me to that property event because he's been interested in property as well, and he was going to come to that property event. He had one buy-to-let property at the moment, at that time, so he knew about investing. He already bought a buy-to-let. I'd never even got that far. And he came along to that event. He was going to come along to that event, but then didn't. Something got in the way. He decided he wasn't going to come. He prioritized something else over coming, which is fine. And in that time that he didn't come to that event, he has been looking at buying a flip project. Now that's 3.5 years he's been looking at buying a flip project. As I see it today, our property portfolio is worth probably about £9 million, and the deal we're doing this week will put another sort of 4 million on top of that. So in the time that he has been looking to buy a flip, we have gone out, instead of looking, we have gone out and bought stuff, and we have gone out and done developments, rent service accommodation management, those type of things, whereas he hasn't. And I think it's because he was in a comfortable, and still is in a comfortable place. So I had those drivers, as you mentioned earlier, the reasons why we were doing it. He didn't have the same drivers. He had a stable job, he had a nice house, he was happy with it. It just wasn't really on his radar to do something other than what he was already doing, because he was comfortable with what he had achieved. So that was fine. And I think sometimes that comfort is a really dangerous place to be.
Yeah, especially if you're not happy. And I think what you touched on there is, if you're comfortable and you're happy, then fine. Just put the blinkers on, right? You don't need to listen to anything else. But if you're not happy and you want to progress, it doesn't have to be 9 million. It can be. It can be 20. It can be one. It can be a few buy to lets. But if you're not happy, find a way to scratch that itch and get going if you can.
That is so true, and you're absolutely right. When we had the boats, the boat story is quite interesting. But when we had the boats are a great example of, I think, great example regardless of life in some ways, because it doesn't matter what size boat you have, and in some, in certain circles and generally, the bigger the boat, the more money you have. That's generally the way it is. It's a status symbol, right? It doesn't matter how big your boat is. There's always someone else with a bigger one. And it just doesn't matter, right? It doesn't matter. You just need to be happy with what you've got. So if you are happy with what you've got, then great. You don't need to be listening to people saying, oh, you should be doing this and you should be doing that, because you're happy. But if you're not, and if you think, exactly as you said there, if you think, actually, I've got an itch to scratch, I can do more, I want more, then absolutely you can do that. But you don't have to. You don't have to at all.
No, I think that's a great bit of advice there. And so let's start getting into the strategies and what you've done a little bit more. You started with service accommodation, rent service accommodation. Tell us why you started in that particular area.
Yeah, sure. So I started with rent to a service accommodation because at that time we didn't have any money. So I didn't have any money, and I didn't at that time believe that I could use other people's money and I could raise private finance. At that time, I didn't believe that. So people had been saying at the event, do the strategies. People will follow you. They'll watch you. They'll give you a phone call saying, "I've got some money to invest. Can you invest it?" And I thought, yeah, whatever. That doesn't really happen, does it? Because at that time, I didn't know any different. I was still coming from a world where you basically, if you wanted more money, you had to work harder, or get promoted or move jobs. So I didn't understand that at that point. I didn't really believe it. So I started with Rent to SA because we live in Cheltenham, and Cheltenham's quite a capital high area. Capital values are quite high. And because we didn't have any money, started thinking about buy to lets, but we couldn't really scrape together a deposit. And again, at that time, I didn't believe that I could work with investors to do that. We weren't really interested in doing HMOs. one of the things we started in our early journeys when we set out our values and our business is we wanted to do something that we'd be happy to live in. And because we had two kids, we couldn't figure out how we were going to live in a HMO. So that we sort of ruled that out. We've since moved that on slightly in terms of, well, actually, as long as we're happy to live in it, if we were on our own, then that would be fine. So we were always trying to provide decent accommodation. And commercial conversions at that time I thought were too big because I didn't understand the kind of concept of working with other people and other people's money. So we came down to service accommodation. Cheltenham's a good place for serviced accommodation. We've got a good tourism industry, although to be honest, now we've learned actually that the market is actually the trades and the contractors rather than the tourism market. So we just started out with Rent to SA because we had no money and we wanted to do it where we lived, and service accommodation seemed to fit those criteria, those tick boxes. I've actually stayed in service accommodation when I was in the corporate world a number of times. I just didn't know that's what it was. I just thought, oh, this is pretty good. You can get an apartment now. I don't like that. So, work were booking apartments for us to stay in rather than hotel rooms. We were all going, yeah, it's brilliant because we've got an apartment instead of a hotel room. And the work were going, yeah, it's cheaper than being a hotel room. So, it was a win-win in that sense. So I didn't understand what it was until I started doing it. But that's where we started, was Rent to SA. And we still got our SA business as well.
And that's important that you completely bought into the product, right? So, like you said, it was very important that you actually could see yourself staying in there yourself, and you had in the past. So it's a product that you really could believe in and get behind, and and that just helps with the focus, right? Because you're not looking over the fence at other strategies and things like that, and it just helps put the blinkers on, and away you go. Um,
Blinkers are a key, I think, actually, as well. Yeah. So it's really easy, particularly when you get started in property, to see all these different things, and they all work. And generally, they all work where you are as well. So you can generally see lots of different opportunities. But it's really key that you just go, okay, that's fine. I can see that that's an opportunity, but that's an opportunity for someone else. I'm just going to stay in my lane and do my thing.
yeah, that's so important. So let's get into your first service accommodation project. I think it's a great way for people to learn on the journey. Tell us what it was and where you found it.
Yeah, sure. So I did the training about how to do service accommodation, and I'd been out and started viewing properties with agents. And again, back to my naivety at that point, I was asking all sorts of random questions because I'd heard things like, you could do exchange with delayed completions, you could do lease options, and I'd heard all these things, and I thought they were strategies rather than tools. So I was like trying to view properties without even asking what the vendor's circumstance was. Oh, well, yeah, this is great. How about I rent it for 5 years and buy it then? And it's just like that wasn't what they were doing. They were trying to sell it, and I never really got to that stage. So I think in about 14 viewings with probably 14 different agents and 14 massive learnings from each and every viewing. And there's a couple I look back now and go, look, if I'd have just answered that question in a different way, I know I'd have got that property. Or if I'd just answered that question in a different way or positioned that slightly differently, I know I'd have got that property. So I think anyone getting started, the concept of starting out of area and working with different estate agents out of area to hone your skills, I think is a great idea. I didn't do that, and sort of wish I had, but it was okay in the end. But the one we actually got, the property we got, our first one, was on the works notice board, and the advert read something like 4-bedroom flat to rent, central town, either renting by the room or by the whole apartment. And then the bottom bit said more available, which really piqued my interest. I was like, well, what's more available? And actually, it was a really good friend of mine who sent me it was on the virtual notice board, sent me the link to it via the online, the work system. And basically decided what I'll do is I'll ring up the gent and have a conversation and see what's what. So that's pretty much exactly what we did. And went down to see the gentleman. And what he had was a block of purpose-built student accommodation. But it was purpose-built student accommodation from about 20 years ago. So it's a little bit not tired because he'd spent all summer refurbing it, but it was a little bit specification-wise different to what the current stock of new build purpose-built student accommodation was delivering. So he had this block. It had been built for the university. He'd built it, given it to the university on a 10-year lease, all fine. They'd renewed it a couple of times. They'd come to the end of this lease and they'd said, look, we don't really want this anymore. So he thought, oh, that's okay. What I'll do is I'll take it and I'll just run it as student accommodation. So he tried to do that. And what he actually found was that while he'd been refurbing it all himself with his teams, the university had opened a massive new student complex up the road with big ensuite rooms, nice big kitchens, all the facilities, super fast, all the facilities that this town centre location didn't have. So we had a problem. We had this building that was empty pretty much. We had a couple of tenants in there, but pretty much empty. So I approached him and said, look, we just want to take one of these flats. They were C3, so that was fine. We took one of these flats, and I want to just take one of these flats and run it as serviced accommodation. So over the next couple of weeks, we talked about what we were going to do, how we were going to do it. He checked me out. He checked the strategy out. Turns out that he knew someone who I used to work with. So he'd asked them about me. And in the end, he basically turned around in Waitrose Cafe, no less. So I always remember that Waitrose Cafe. And he basically said, well, do you want to take the whole block on a commercial lease for 10 years? To which I said yes. And then went, bugger, I better try and figure out what I've just said yes to. But I'd said yes, because I thought it sounded like a good idea. So we took the whole block on theoretically, we're going to take it on a 10-year lease. And then we took it on a 5-year lease because there was, we didn't want 10 years, we wanted 5 years, stamp duty implications, etc. So we took a 5-year lease on the block, and we still have it today. So that was our first ever deal. Went to get one apartment, possibly two, so we could do some split testing, and ended up with 8.
I like the approach that you were going to split test it. That made sense. And like you said, when the opportunity came up to take it all or not, I think it's just a confidence thing, right? You had the training, you did know the steps. It's just, well, it's presented to you that way. You're either going to get the deal or not. Let's see what we can do with this. And I'm sure there were probably exit clauses that you might have factored in there as well. Like,
yeah, so that conversation was the initial yes. Then there was a whole host of things in the background around, do the numbers work? What's the negotiation going to be? But as a principle and a head of terms, yes, we'll take the whole lot on a commercial lease. Now let's work out the finer details. So let's do the numbers. Let's do the exit options. Let's make sure the contract allows us to, if we needed to, put them on standard buy-to-lets, and the rents would cover. Yeah, so the de-risking part happened after the principle of the agreement. Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, I would not suggest that anyone just goes out there, looks up for one flat at maybe £1,000 and goes, you know what, I'll take the whole lot, for 9 grand. I think you need to be a bit more savvy than that. But conceptual wise, yeah. So then we end up with an apart hotel.
I mean, that is a great, as you say, for a first deal. That is amazing for a first deal. Did you have to? Was there any refurb costs that you had to fork up? Any furniture costs that you had to sort out from that perspective?
Yeah, and this is where again I think our inexperience at that time shows. So what we'd done is we'd walked into these apartments, which were lovely and presented, and they'd been repainted and everything else, and they had decent kitchens in them. But we had it in our head that the vision of our customer was something slightly different. So we put those on, and they were doing okay. But what we did in there is one of the flats needed a bit more painting, and we needed some new vinyl, new lino, and a few maybe a new cupboard door here and there. So on that one, we decided we were going to put a new kitchen in for it. So we put a new kitchen in, we refurbished it all. We actually changed the cupboard to an ensuite as well, because we were thinking our avatar was more families, because they were big apartments. And we spent some money doing that. We had to furnish them all as well. So what we did in the end is we bought all the furniture, then we used some of the creative asset finance companies, and we leased back the furniture. So we effectively used the same little pot of money to furnish about 3 or 4 apartments all at once. Then we put them onto a lease, so we got the money back and then did it again. So that worked really well in terms of scaling up. Now, that flat that we refurbed doesn't really, I mean, it generates a bit more income. It absolutely generates a bit more income. And over time, it will sort of, have generated more income than the other flats, but it's not what we thought it was going to be. And actually our market is much more trades. So it probably, in hindsight, but obviously hindsight's a wonderful thing, probably wasn't worth doing. But it certainly wasn't a bad thing to do. It just wasn't probably the best thing to do.
No, but I mean that's part of the teething, at that stage in your career, in your property career. I mean, when you look at it now, do you have, right, I'll only spend this much on a service accommodation unit if it's not mine, if it's a rent to rent, because it needs to produce this level of return within this time frame, for example?
Yeah, so we're a lot more refined now in terms of the numbers. I mean, Vicky runs that side of it, so she's got all that sort of all squared away. What we tend to find now is we actually do more management than rent to SAs. So we've got a core rent to SA portfolio, and we actually tend to manage other people's properties now for us as well. So landlords, buy-to-let landlords. We've had some actually where we've got somewhere there's a buy-to-let landlord, a letting agent, someone who's taken the rent on guaranteed rental and then passed it on to us as a management company, and that still worked as SA. So, certain properties will support that type of model. Others won't. So we don't take anything on anymore that doesn't work for everybody. And that's something else we learned in the other days where we were taking stuff on that worked for either one party or the other. Normally, because we were quite generous and wanted to get going quite eager, we ended up making it not work for us, but it worked for everyone else. So there was somewhere. So is it really worth us doing this?
I'll do this for free. I'll pay you.
We pretty much were. In some cases, we were pretty much doing that because we hadn't got the full financial models together, so we weren't really sure of what all our numbers and costs were. Now we knew the detailed analysis. We knew what they were going to be in terms of the rental income or the SA income. We knew how that was going to work. We knew what the costs were going to be because we've got a really good cleaning teams. So we knew all that side of things. But then when we started to scale and put in things like all the virtual assistants, our company overheads were basically killing all the profit of all these properties. We had a 24-hour call center, that was costing regardless. So now we've got a model that works, and we know exactly what everything costs. We know exactly how much each property's apportionment cost goes towards the overall company overhead. So it's taken us probably the first year to sort of refine all that. But now it's working really, really well, and we can scale really, really quickly. So if people come to us and say, "I've got an SA unit, can you manage it?" We've also nationwide now as well. So if anyone wants anything nationwide, they can just ring us up. We can go and do that, not a problem at all. So it has to work for both parties. But now we've got the models in place. It's really easy to do.
I want to move on to your commercial conversions now. So this is like the chronological journey. So you've now taken a different path. You've gone down commercial conversions. Why did you change your strategy to an extent, or take up a new path?
Yeah, add a new one on. So once we'd got all the SA stuff systemized, and Vicky runs that as an ops director, that was fine. In some ways, I was bored, if that was a way to say that. So what do I do now? Because I was really good at doing the initial numbers, the deals, the people relationship side of things. Now, once we'd done all that and it was all handed over and it was in the systems, like, well, now what? And I'd always wanted to be involved in doing property, and then at that point wanted to start owning assets as well. Now, again, by that time, I'd seen how all this works. My mindset had shifted again, and actually the concept of doing a deal where someone else would lend you the money to help do it, that I'd seen it happen so many times now. I'd seen it happen for other people. So I was like, well, clearly this does work. Let me go and figure out how this works. So that's exactly what we did. So we then started working on how do we find people with money. By this point, my networks had expanded as well, because I've been in property a couple of years. Or a year or so. Networks had expanded, and then people were coming to me with money and saying, "I've got some money to invest. What can we do with it?" So just putting all that together, and a bit of a passion for property generally. I mean, I don't go and hug houses or anything like that, just in case someone's wondering, lick bricks or anything. But I do like the concept of property. I do like the concept of taking a space and creating something nice out of it. So just putting all that together naturally led to developments and commercial conversions. So it was just as simple as that. I was like, okay, I've done this. This is working. Now what? Well, let's take all these things. It now points towards property development and commercial conversions. So let's go and do that. So we did.
And do your commercial conversions, do you use them as service accommodation afterwards, so they almost complement each other?
Yeah, it's a great strategy to combine the two. So we've got one we are just finishing at the moment. It'll probably finish in the next month or two, which will be the first one where they've actually managed to do the conversion to SA. But yeah, absolutely, we're going to be doing that.
Yeah, I think that's such an important thing for people to pick up there, that you've created parallel multiple streams of income. It's not necessarily in a completely different area or completely different industry. You've got your cash flow strategy, which is your management, service accommodation. Then you've got, as you said, your wealth creation side, the lump sums of cash and building up, owning those assets. But they complement each other because you can then have the commercial conversions into service accommodation. I think it's a fantastic strategy.
Yeah, you're right. And what's key as well is I've not tried to do that all at once. It's built up, but it doesn't have to take many years to build up. But it just needs to be, in some ways, a sequential process. So yeah, the conversions into SA work really, really well because we're commercial conversions at its ultimate core is just an acquisition strategy. It's just a way of acquiring properties. You know, in the same way that a buy to let, you take it, you refurbish it, you add some value or some forced depreciation, and then you rent it out for passive income. This is just exactly the same, but on a bigger scale. So we're taking one building and then maybe creating 10 or 15 or 20 or whatever amount of apartments out of it. Once you've got those apartments, you know, if you're going to keep them, whether you run them as a buy to let, whether you run them as serviced accommodation, whether you slightly change them and configure them to be a HMO if you can, it doesn't really matter. It's just a way of getting cash flow out of the asset that you've created.
So what are some of the things that you look for in your commercial buildings? You know, when you're looking for these properties, are you looking for town centres, for example? Are you looking in certain towns? Are you looking for permitted development changes? What are some of the things that you look for?
So in some ways, Raj, bit of everything. What I'd look for at the moment, I've got a couple of opportunities that we're doing at the moment. So I'll give you an example of what they are. One of them is an off-market opportunity that's come from me via networking. So we're looking at that. That will be, it's like a 9-flat scheme. At the moment, that's probably the minimum we do. We say about 10 or over is what we'd look for. So 9's about right, but because it's off market, we'll have a look at it. And it looks fairly decent, so we'll do that one. The other thing we're looking at is just what opportunities are around. So what we try and do is have sort of 4 projects running at any one time. Okay, and there's a couple of reasons for that. 4 projects running at any one time is about what I can manage without worrying too much. You know, 4 projects keeps me busy enough. There's enough work going on, but it's not overwhelming. But it's I wasn't say comfortable, but it's not comfortable. It's a stretch, but that's fine. Anything less than that, and I think it probably is a little bit too comfortable. The other thing outside of it is the teams that we use as well. We tend to use the same teams, which we're building up in the area quite nicely. So we've got a really good sort of strategic partnership with a local construction company or a construction management company. And we're building up a really good relationship with them. They like what we do. We like what they do. We know how it all works. So, you know, 4 a year in our local area works quite well with those not constraints, but those factors. Now, what I don't want to do with this, because I've seen other people do the same sort of things as well, is it can be really easy to scale. So I could probably scale what we've got at the moment, and I could probably do 10, 15, 20 projects a year. Now, I might want to get to 10 when the teams expand. But what I don't want to do is get to the point where I have all of these teams basically waiting for the next project, and I have to go and find them something to then feed the sort of sausage machine. So I only want to do the projects that are decent projects. Okay, so they're profitable and they fit the 10 and above. They're in the sort of area and they can fit within the sort of current pipelines, stretching it out a bit. So I don't want to be having to buy nonsense projects, or not nonsense, that's not the right word, but I don't want to have to buy projects that are suboptimal just because I need to fit something into the pipeline because the team's there and they need a job to do. So it's just got to be a bit of a balance in that sense. So at the moment we're looking for, anything, sort of 10 flats and above. Permitted development is brilliant because if it's got permitted development rights, i.e. an office or a shop or maybe even a barn, then we don't need to worry about going through planning, which is a bonus. But we also pick up stuff that's already got planning as well. So the latest conversion, we're just we took it on in October. We launched the sales on this last week, just gone. So that's a good insight into the market. We launched the flats. We had 7 viewings and 5 offers on one of the flats in our latest conversion. So great to see the market.
Did you just say you picked it up in October and start?
That's the other thing I love about.
You didn't do the conversion that quickly, did you?
Yep. Yeah, that's the thing about conversions. They're so quick.
Wow. That is very impressive.
Yeah, so to be clear, it's not all finished, but there's enough of it finished to launch the show flats. So
right,
but it will be finished by sort of April time. So it's still fairly quick.
And that's the thing with, like you said, if you've got a good building to convert, you've got the right team who know it's just rinse repeat, right? Almost from that perspective. If there's nothing behind the walls that you didn't want there or anything like that, or they're not falling apart.
Yeah, exactly that. Yeah.
So yes, so you stick inside your local area primarily when you're doing your commercial conversion projects still?
Yeah, it's the sort of local area, although we are looking at expanding at the moment because we're looking at a couple of opportunities of working with others and bringing our expertise to help other people. And it just so happens that the teams that we work with also have, good subcontractors in those sort of areas as well. So it's more around, as long as I'm confident that I've got the right team to do the job, then we will look at doing a conversion outside of our area. But to be honest, there's so much stuff around, and if we're looking at doing 4 projects a year at the moment, I don't really need to go outside my area. There's enough here to keep going. So we're in Cheltenham and Gloucester, 2 fairly big, one's a city, one's a town, but they're, between them is a population of maybe 320,000, something like that. So they're fairly decent size habitations. So I don't really need to go further out, but we will do.
And I guess the obvious question, the one that we always get asked time and time again, is, you said there's so many opportunities. Where do you source yours from? Is it direct to vendor? Is it through agents and sources? Is it all of the above?
It's pretty much all of the above. Most of our deals come via commercial agents. So we've got some really good relationships with commercial agents, and they bring us things, because they know what we're doing. They know when we're coming to the end of a project. They will basically ring us up and say, are you interested in this? Prime example, something happened the other day where we got a phone call saying, we think this might be coming to the market. Would you be interested if it does? Well, yes. And again, the answer is yes, of course it is. And then we'll work out the details later. Yes, we're interested in it, subject to the right price, which we can talk about later on. So agents predominantly off market. We get quite a few off market leads as well, because people in the area know what we're doing. So networking helps with that. I'll be honest, with some of the off market deals though, there's generally an unrealistic expectation, because if the owners of a commercial building, and this is not, I'm not trying to say to all your listeners who are commercial building owners that they're wrong, but generally what happens is a commercial owner of a building will look at their building, they'll think, I can get 10 flats in there. If they're selling for £200,000 each, that means it's worth £2 million. Therefore, I want £1 million, please, for the building. And well, actually, no, it doesn't work like that, because we've got to take in the fees, you've got the build costs, you've got the professional fees, you've got the bank finance, you've got the risk pot, you've got all this other stuff. So actually, it's probably more like £500,000. And they're like, oh no, I'm not going to bother doing that. Then what they'll do is they'll go to the agents will tell them the same thing, and then it'll go on the market at 750, sit there for a year, and then someone will buy it at 500 in the end anyway. So that's an actual real scenario. Yeah, generally off-market leads are okay, because you're direct to vendor, you're not competing with anyone, but they tend to have unrealistic expectations sometimes.
Now that's interesting. Yeah, and I think it's true. It does happen time and time again. It's like they've done the figures on the back of a fag packet, for example, or beer mat, and it's like, wow, you did that appraisal that quickly. That's brilliant. I wish I'd done that.
They also look at the on-market price rather than the sold price as well. So that one there was on the market for 200 grand. Yeah, but it sold for 150 because it was there for 2 years. You don't look at that part of it, but.
And like you said, sometimes the realization comes down the line, and that just shows how important it is to keep that pipeline of leads coming through, right? So you're not relying on that deal. If that guy's not ready to do a deal with you then, or if he gets it sold another way, then great. It doesn't matter. There's plenty more coming in. So you're not dependent on these leads, and you're not skewing your figures to make you fit around them at the end of the day. I think that's an important one, isn't it?
Absolutely, yeah, it is. And I always say to people, property deals are like waves. It might be a flat, calm sea, but there's always going to be a wave coming at some point. So, it's just, don't worry about this deal. If it doesn't work, walk away. There will be another one.
No, Dan, that's great. I've got a few more questions for you before we wrap things up. And one I wanted to touch on was time management, because, like you said, you've got your service accommodation business, you've got the commercial conversions, 4 projects a year, you've got a lot on. It's how you allocate that time. So where do you spend most of your time within your businesses?
Oh, great question. So the service accommodation, I don't really have any involvement in other than an oversight. So I don't get involved in the day-to-day. I don't really get involved in many of the strategic decisions anymore, because I don't need to, because Vicky's got it covered, and we might have a conversation about it, but I don't really get involved that much. So in terms of my time on a weekly basis, that's very, very minimal. In some cases, that can just be a conversation over dinner. That might be the end of that. The other side of things, the property projects that are ongoing, majority of my time will be spent, particularly as a developer, because this is where we sort of earn our crust, is in the deal analysis, the numbers, the investors, and then pulling all that together to actually create a deal. So at the moment, we're due to complete on one on Friday, and probably for the last 3 or 4 weeks, it's been my main focus, and that's been solicitors, it's been getting insurance, it's been getting a lot of the things in line to make the deal work. Having spent maybe the last 6 months before that working with the investors, lenders, deal analysis, etc., etc., etc. So in terms of the actual builds, they're generally, again, mostly outsourced because we've got the same team of builders who know what they're doing. They've got good specifications of finishes and works, employee requirements, all those things. Most of it's all wrapped up in JCT contracts, so they know what they're doing. So it's only like when I get the phone calls that we started the interview, we're talking about, there's a well, what do we do about it? Or a variance. So that's the only sort of time I'll get involved in most of those. Other than occasional choice where I might have missed something on, so the one the other day was that, Dan, what colour do you want the front door? I can't find it on the specifications. Oh, sorry, I forgot about that. But other than that, most of the things are covered, so I don't need to worry about that. So as a developer, it's generally networking, getting out there, doing social media, talking to investors. I do a lot of time helping other people as well in terms of mentoring, coaching, and teaching. That'll take a bit of time, and then the rest of it is family time.
No, that's really important that what you focus on there. You try and remove yourself from the day-to-day operations. You don't want to be a cog in the wheel that's everyone's dependent on at the end of the day. You just created a worse job for yourself than you ever had before, I guess. Especially if you don't like it. If you love it, it's a different thing, but it will affect you scaling. And I guess that's the important thing for you, I would have thought, because does let's take the builder who's a developer doing a small flip or a small project. You're everything. You're on site every day, and then when you finish with that project, you have to go out and find another one and do it all over again. So I think it's important for people to understand where you allocate your time. What would you say was one of the most important hires that you made early on, or the most important tasks that you started outsourcing?
Oh yeah, great question. So you're absolutely right. You don't want to be that bottleneck where everyone's trying to come through. You need an answer for everything. And I did in the early days find myself doing that as well. So I think the most important hire, I'll speak to the development side of it, but we've got 2 VAs who literally spend most of their time doing inbox management, email management, invoices, and then working with the bookkeepers to make sure all the books reconcile. Because each of these projects is effectively it's in an SPV, so it's its own company. So they've got the whole project finance side of things to do. So I've got 2 VAs who constantly just do that. That's what they do. Those are the ones that are sort of directly employed. I've got a new executive assistant who is basically becoming my deputy. So what I was finding with putting in the VAs to do the inbox management was great, but what they were actually then doing was we were becoming very efficient at pointing out what I needed to do next, which was great. But then I wanted someone else to do that rather than me. So things like, okay, we've got this. We need to respond to the utility companies with which accounts this company needs. Very good things like that. So now I've got an executive assistant who does all that side of things for me. So they're basically becoming my deputy in the business. Other hires, I haven't really got any hires because everything else is more outsourced. So my QS project manager, even the broker, work really good with some really good brokers. They do a lot of the finance side of things for me. So I use the teams and use their expertise, and then I just sit there as a sort of coordination point, just seeing the whole waterfront of everything that's going on. On the SA side of things, the things that were key was getting the VAs in early to do all the guest management. Then we got the call center in. That really worked really well. But I suppose the best one was actually getting my wife Vicky, who's the ops director, to just look after the ops side of things, and she was really good at that. So not sure if that's the best hire ever, but probably the best marriage ever. That worked really well.
Yeah, that's again, that's a whole nother topic of conversation, is having the people on board around you, in your family, close to you, because it's one thing for you to make this left turn in life when everyone thinks you're going to go straight. It's another thing when you, oh, by the way, you're coming with me, are you on board? That's another transition that people have to contend with, isn't it?
Oh, it is, absolutely. And I see some people whose life partners are dead against them doing anything, and that's really, really difficult, because it's one thing if they're not really involved or not interested, that's fine. But when they are categorically opposed and will do anything to stop you doing it, and I have seen that, that's really, really difficult. So yeah, having the support around you is definitely key.
Yeah, it's funny that, and that can make, that can make it a non-starter, I guess. If you can't get your life partners on board with you, then you might never get going. I mean, for me, my wife's taken the view, and it works for us, that she just stays out of it. She's happy. She's just like, do you know what? Just crack on. Do what you're doing. I don't really want to. I'm not that interested. I mean, she probably thinks I'm just messing around when I'm doing podcasts and things like that. So, but yeah, no. Again, that's a whole other story, talking about how it works with your partners and the people around you in life. Dan, just before we look to wrap things up, what one bit of advice and tip could you give people looking to start in property? Maybe a couple of buying rules that you have. We've touched on a few, but if you were going to do this again, what do you wish someone told you?
Oh, cool. So in some ways, I think I'm quite fortunate in that I started the right way. Although what I wish I'd done is started a lot earlier. So all those years when we were watching Homes Under the Hammer, I wish I'd just done something at that point, which would be, mean it would be in a very different position now. But you can't regret that because you can't go back. But what I always say to people is basically there's 3 steps to this. The first thing is to get the knowledge and the education. Now, whether that's from podcasts or books, or courses or paid courses, mentioned, it doesn't matter. But you just need to get some sort of education, and Googling stuff and listening to your mates down the pub or your parents, and that's not knowledge. That's not the right place to go and get it. So go and find the right knowledge from people who are doing what you want to do. Second thing is, then I say was we just touched on a minute ago, Raj, was have the people around you who can support you in doing what you're going to do. You want to surround yourself in your networks with people that are pulling you up the mountain rather than sort of trying to drag you down. And if that means that you need to start spending less time with certain people, then unfortunately that might have to be the case. Not saying you need to fall out with anyone, but you almost need a new circle of friends who are going to be bringing you up and supporting you. So that's step 1. Step 2, and step 3 is the key to all of this. Is once you have those 2 things, take the action that you need to get you where you want to go, because there's no point learning about it, and there's no point having all the networking in the world if you're not then going to use that to actually change something or move your life further forward. So that's what I'd say, those 3 steps: education, support, action.
Dan, I think that's a great way to finish things and end things there. I've really enjoyed having you on the show with us today to hear about your journey, to hear about your strategies and why you take those approaches. And as we touched on earlier, how important mindset is to all of this. It is so imperative. Dan, if people want to find you and learn more about you, where can they go?
Yeah, so generally, if they want to connect with me, any of the social media platforms, I'm on there. So if you want to look on the Facebook, Dan Eaton, Instagram is at Dan _hyphen _Eaton1. They can email me if they want to, or go onto our website, www.pivotal-point-group.co.uk, and there's a contact us form there. So if you want to do that, then not a problem at all.
Brilliant. Dan, thank you very much once again for your time. And I look forward to catching up again soon and seeing what you're up to in the future.
Oh, Raj, thanks very much for having me. It's been absolutely fantastic talking to you this morning. Great trip down memory lane. So thank you very much indeed.
No problem at all. No, I appreciate it. Thanks, Dan.
No problem.